Welcome back. You're still watching NTV Weekend Edition. Thank you all for staying with us. And if you're just joining us, I am Sandra Twinobdio. On Talk of the Nation tonight, we look at the state of Uganda's economy, and we know that, like in many parts of the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a negative impact on their economies, but also coming back home, it has had an impact on Uganda's economy in several ways. And this year alone, 2020, Uganda's economic growth is projected at between 0.4% to 1.7% compared to 5.6% in 2019. The national lockdown that started in March 2020 to slow down the spread of the coronavirus has led to devastation of most sectors of the economy and also even totally wiped out some. Most businesses have not been spared by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and small and medium-sized enterprises have not been left an exception. However, businesses offering essential services have had mixed fortunes because of the different reasons. So to discuss this and more on Talk of the Nation today, we have Mr. John Walugembe, who is the Executive Director of Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. Mr. Walugembe,
hi,
welcome to Talk of the Nation tonight.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, we know that small and medium-sized enterprises form a major backbone of Uganda's economy.
Sure.
Paint for us a clear picture of how these businesses are performing currently.
So just for the viewers who may not be aware, over 80% of our private sector in this country is made up of micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. They are the backbone. They account for more than 90% of our employment in this country. So obviously, as a result of the pandemic, many of them are suffering, and they are suffering in very many ways, or they have suffered in very many ways. The biggest problem was the issue of diminished demand. Customers are not buying when people come into their shops, so they're coming to their businesses, they're asking for credit. Please let me pay 10%, I'll bring the money later, and so on. So this diminished demand is a big, big problem. And then there are some businesses that are winding up in particular sectors, as you know. And that any business that involves a lot of face-to-face contact, movement, businesses that are still under some form of lockdown, many of them have had to wind up. And when businesses wind up, it means people lose employment. The Ministry of Finance has estimated that between 2 to 3 million Ugandans might have lost or will lose their jobs as a direct result of this pandemic. So many businesses are struggling, and obviously when people are not selling, then you have what you call cash flow problems. Liquidity within the business. They cannot pay their obligations, financial obligations, as they come due. And so this is the state of the sector. Obviously, because it's a wide sector, some businesses are doing better than others. And as you mentioned, certain sectors were able to weather the storm. Businesses in agriculture that don't export, certain businesses that are in ICT, certain businesses that entail movement, things from here to there. Telecoms are doing very well because people are moving less and they are calling more. So not everyone has suffered, but overall it's a dire picture.
All right. Well, I'll be asking you on some of those businesses that have been able to, flourish in this period.
Yes.
But we would also like to hear from you. We know that some countries went ahead to offer tax holidays, among other things. How has the government of Uganda helped? What would you say the government has done to support the SMEs? Well,
the government of Uganda has made an effort. People must recognize that countries like ours, we have a very limited resource envelope, and the governments have very limited fiscal space to intervene and make the kind of interventions that are necessary to turn things around. But they made an effort during the budget reading. They made a number of proposals. For instance, they promised to give close to 1 trillion shillings to UDP. They promised to give close to 77 billion to the Microfinance Support Center for on-lending to MFIs and SACCOs. They promised to pay domestic carriers. They allocated 670 billion for that. They promised to quickly expedite the payment of VAT refunds to certain businesses. They deferred taxes for particular businesses. So there was an effort. Obviously, some of the efforts didn't go far enough. For instance, we felt that there was need for some form of tax exemption or tax holidays. For instance, when during the 3 months period when businesses were not operational, we felt that businesses should not have been asked to make payroll payments to URA or to pay for social security payments to NSSF. So those are some of the concerns that we still had. We felt, for instance, that pay-as-you-earn threshold needed to be increased so that people have more disposable income. We also felt that the VAT rate can be lowered from maybe 18% to 16%. Why is this important? This is important because it's a vicious cycle. If people don't have money to buy, businesses won't get money to pay taxes. And then government won't have enough money to deliver social services. So you have to look at it as a very interconnected kind of cycle.
So in your view, the government has done pretty much. It has tried to support the SMEs, but there are those other extra things that you wished it could look at, like you mentioned.
Yes, yes, and you see the issue, the other concern, of course, is that government left the budget intact, and that was a key concern. They presented a 45.4 trillion budget. So after the COVID pandemic, they pretty much left it intact. They approved it, and then we are continuing to spend. Now what you're seeing is that you're seeing a lot of budget shortfalls, obviously, because 42% of all our revenue that domestic revenue comes from international trade, import taxes and things of that sort. So what you're seeing are significant shortfalls. That's why you see government starting to now request for supplementary budget. 6.5 trillion they have asked for already. So this is a concern for us because as government borrows from the domestic market, I think 4.5 trillion they plan to borrow domestically, it crowds out the private sector.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know you've had this. Majority of the people have talked about the entire period that we're in now as the new normal.
Correct.
You know, so we've seen a thriving of businesses going online. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think if the vaccine is discovered or if we find a treatment for COVID-19, do you think these businesses that are now operating online will continue thriving, or they're likely to get back? They'll
continue thriving, and to the SMEs out there, this is not just a new normal, it's going to be the future. So certain things will change, of course. Probably people will put on less masks as the vaccine is found, but the digitalization move cannot be stopped, and people had better find ways of digitalizing and getting onto the bandwagon. You know, we don't want to be like those people who stuck with their typewriters as computers came until they were left behind. So let's try to appreciate this trend and take advantage of it. And I think to government, we need to find ways of making sure that the cost of data comes down. We need to find that the cost of ICT equipment comes down. We need to ensure that internet speeds are really good. In any part of the country. This is how we shall be able to compete.
All right. Now, we know that also Entebbe International Airport was closed when they were trying to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Do you think this affected, how has this actually affected the tourism sector in particular? Because we know that it has a lot of SMEs in that sector, like tour operators.
Correct. So the tourism sector, as you know, has been a very good source of foreign currency for this country. And when the airport was closed, you find that tourist inflows kind of plummeted. And it was a good decision, really, and that's why the government has been lauded for its efforts. And we're also glad that government said, you know what, we need to reopen, and that airport has been reopened. Obviously, tourists are not going to come flooding in. There are concerns about their health and so on. So all of us need to assure tourists that they are safe here and they'll be well taken care of. We shall see a boost. It will take some time. The effects of this pandemic will take long, but I think all of us should be confident that we shall get through it. For the tourism operators, my advice would be, look at domestic tourists, really. They cannot fill they cannot fill the gap that has been left by foreign tourists, but they can help. Ugandans are not as poor as you may think of them. You know, sometimes you go to hotels and then they're like, oh, this room is $120, and you say, okay, now how special is this bed? Why do I have to pay $200 to just have a nap or things like that? So let's try to be more realistic. Let's charge fees that are affordable. Let's focus on the quantity. Instead of getting one tourist after 4 months, get 100 people, each paying 50,000. You will make the same returns. So it's just a mindset shift, I think.
Mindset shift.
Yes.
Well, as finally and maybe briefly,
Correct.
what is the Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises currently doing to support the different businesses?
So the Federation is very active in the space of digitalization. We are working with different partners to ensure that SMEs are equipped with the skills that they need to survive in the new normal. We are very strong on the area of digital skilling, digital literacy. We are also supporting different SMEs in refugee camps and in other areas with cash injections, working with different partners to ensure that they are able to access the necessary liquidity so that they do not collapse. We are also a very strong advocate. We speak for the SME sector so that government hears what exactly is going on in the sector. What things are they doing right? What things are they doing and are they not doing right? And then to find common ground to ensure that the sector grows. So the Federation is at the forefront of speaking and articulating the interests of this SME sector because we believe it's very critical.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. John Walugembe, for joining us tonight in our studios. That was the Executive Director of Small and Medium Size Enterprises, speaking to us about the current state of Uganda's economy in these times that we're in of the COVID-19 pandemic. I know for a fact that this is the time to work together and support one another, and like you said, to have some bit of mindset shift so that we thrive through this period. Thank you all for joining us on NTV Weekend Edition, and of course, right after this, NTV Weekend Edition will continue shortly, so do not go away.